Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese. I'm here with my co-host, Nick Olson. Nick, it's been a minute. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm alive. So is Kindred Skulls.
Yeah.
Good to be back. Disappointing end of the season, as you covered in our recap pod. But this is actually my favorite part of the season in some ways. One, because the Vikings never win at all, so this is where hope always reigns supreme. And two, it's kind of like it's like you go out, you go shopping, you look forward to the draft, but you sign so many free agents, and we saw how well Kwesi and teams smashed it last offseason, and now they have all this new money to go out and spend. So if they can land on, the Andrew Van Ginkels, just wait till they get, all this cap space. So I'm excited to see how they shake it out. How have you been, Matt?
Yeah. No, I've been doing great. Obviously, I kind of went on a little hiatus from doing the podcast, just being busy, and also when you have two horrible losses in a row, it kind of takes the wind out of you a little bit. And then it's like, I don't know. Do I want to spend time recapping the season? Absolutely. Do I want to talk about free agency and that? But do I want to talk about every single rumor that pops up like every other day about everything that's going on? No, I don't. I don't have a ton of interest in that. So a little bit of a break there. But like you said, I it's probably the free agency and the draft, maybe more so the draft, but free agency as well, is like the time of year where all 32 teams are like, yes, we are getting better, right? Like we will be better than we were last year. So everybody kind of wins, right? In that type of scenario, as opposed to ultimately the NFL season, only one team's really truly happy with their results. So, especially if you're a Vikings fan, like at least in my time of being online as a Vikings fan, the team's been good enough where winning the Super Bowl is an ultimate goal, and it's like a disappointment. Like maybe like 2015 was kind of the last season where it felt like we were happy with the overall result and the direction, right? That second Teddy year where they made the playoffs and it felt like progression. Maybe we're going to be able to jump into that where we're kind of happy with those sorts of results with JJ McCarthy again, right? Or, well, I shouldn't spoil things, right? But we all kind of have a feeling that that's the way it's going to go. Um, but no, for this pod, we kind of wanted to jump into free agency and the Vikings' needs overall. Talk a bit about all of the departing free agents. Maybe we won't hit on a couple of the guys who are like really, really low down the totem pole, but I think it's necessary to set the stage for kind of the needs conversation, right? Because it's a little bit different. Like the way you think about things is a little bit different if you're going to be bringing your own guys back as opposed to everybody who's a free agent who can possibly walks, right? Like, I mean, that makes a massive, massive difference in terms of how the Vikings have to approach it. So we'll start kind of with the main topics, right? And these are the high dollar players who may end up leaving, I would say, right? And you got to start at the top with the quarterback position. Um, you know, Obviously, JJ McCarthy is under contract, being a first-round pick, rehabbing from injury. We're recording this the Tuesday of Combine Week. So Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi just kind of got up on the podium today, and they said that they're expecting JJ McCarthy to be back kind of in April for team activities. So that's a really good sign. But, even with McCarthy there, the Vikings need backups. I guess they did sign Brett Ribbon to a futures contract, right? But I don't think anybody thinks that's like a serious number two option necessarily for the team. So they really have a number of paths they could go, right? They're still in the window where they could franchise tag Sam Darnold, or they could bring back one of Daniel Jones or Nick Mullins. And really, Jones, definitely depends on the market and the appetite other teams have for him. I think my personal plan would be to bring Daniel Jones back as a backup, as pseudo competition and that sort of thing. Failing that, I honestly don't have a problem with Nick Mullins being QB2. I just have a lot of fun whenever Nick Mullins gets in the game. I feel like, I mean, not that he should be a full-time starter, right? Like those are two different things, but he is an entertaining player. So that's more fun as a backup than like, I don't know, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who's just going to take like 12 sacks and not throw the football. He won't throw interceptions, but he's just going to get sacked a lot, right? But the crux of the issue for the Vikings as we enter free agency is Sam Darnold. So I'll leave the question for you, Nick. The Vikings have three, maybe four options with Sam Darnold, right? They can let Sam Darnold walk in free agency. They can tag him and trade him. They can tag him and have him for 1 year, and they can extend him. Of those four options, which are you choosing?
It's funny because with Sam, I remember distinctly tweeting out before the Lions game, end of the season when we battled for the 1 seed, like, "Hey, I love Sam, but, just kind of for the record, while everyone's chatting about it, I think they should roll with JJ McCarthy and either let Sam walk or maybe explore a tag and trade." And it was very contentious because everybody was like, "Oh my gosh." And I was like, "Well, like, yeah, the stats are good, but, at the time, the offense was, like, 10th in EPA per pass attempt, and I think the talent around Sam's a lot better than 10th best. I think, Jefferson, best receiver in the NFL, Addison in the top tier. I'm not gonna say he's like a top 15 receiver, but he's close, and he's certainly one of the best 1Bs, I think, in the league, up there, with some of the other top, number 2 receivers. And Hawkinson's another Pro Bowler, and you got 2 Pro Bowl tight ends or 2 Pro Bowl offensive tackles. So, like, that's a really good, yeah, the guard spots, we're gonna get into how we fix them, but, like, overall, that's probably a top 5 supporting cast, and then you throw on top Kevin O'Connell, one of the better offensive play callers and player coaches in the league. Um, and it's really encouraging, I think, to see that from our reigning coach of the year, that he was able to turn to coach Sam up into what he is. But again, at the time, I was like, he's a good player, and I really appreciate what he's doing. I like his aggression. I like that he sort of found a way to fit into Kevin O'Connell's vision for the offense that is a little bit longer developing, and we hit those deeper drive routes that, like, Kirk Cousins. Kirk was efficient and getting rid of the ball fast, and Sam is not that, and in good ways and in bad. He's not getting rid of the ball fast, and part of that is I think he's not the fastest processor. I said this at the time, not the fastest processor. He can get a little weird, like, he's not inaccurate, he's just inconsistent. Like, he'll throw uncatchable balls, like, every once in a while the ball will just slip out of his hand or something. And then he just, yeah, he makes little brain farts on the field sometimes. But at the time he was rolling, and then we kind of saw the ugliness the last 2 games. And I feel like since the long-winded way of saying since those last 2 games, I feel like everybody's soured on Sam, and forgotten what a good quarterback is. I look at the body of work, and to me, I would be completely fine, especially given how much cap space we have, tagging him and saying, "Okay, McCarthy, you're coming off an injury, and now it's not like, devastating, knee dislocation, but, you're coming off the injury. Let's see if you can beat out Sam in camp." And that way, at least you have a team that, is a playoff competitor, with Sam at the helm. And if McCarthy can beat him out, fantastic. I mean, that's kind of the ideal situation is you want a rookie quarterback, and you have the cap space, but you can also have Darnold. And if McCarthy beats out Darnold, then you're in a situation kind of like the Eagles were when they traded Carson Wentz, or when they they eventually did, but not Carson. They traded Sam Bradford to the Vikings. It doesn't hurt to have multiple quarterbacks who are starting caliber on the team. That said, I think that's a little risky because you run the risk of being stuck with a 40 plus $1 million contract who's a backup, and maybe you don't love the trade offers. The Vikings could have done that with Kirk Cousins, and instead they just chose to let him walk. And so, what I expect the team to do, and I don't have any, I'm completely fine with this too, is just letting him walk and, finagling their free agency pick so that they can hopefully get a third round comp pick out of it. If they spend big and they sign all the splash guys that I want them to sign, that third round comp pick will get canceled out. So maybe that's a point in favor of exploring his market on a tag and trade, as a tag and trade. And with the tag, it'd be fully guaranteed, and the team that trades for him would take on that 40. So they'd have to really believe in Sam as not just like a Geno Smith guy, but like or, well, I guess you could extend him with a Geno Smith type, but you'd have to, like, kind of see Sam pretty securely as, like, yeah, we can build around this guy. So that's a long-winded way of saying, like, I'm still fine with the tag and trade. I expect them to let him walk, and I'm fine with that. And also, by the way, like, I think Daniel Jones on like a $5 million Jameis Winston type, cheap backup contract, that's perfectly fine, and he could probably execute the offense well. I agree with you. Nick Mullins is he can execute the offense, and he knows what he's doing. He just doesn't have an NFL arm, but that's fine. He doesn't he doesn't know it yet. So, um, uh, I'm good. They've got a good QB room. My opinion is when you have a coach as good as Kevin O'Connell, you leverage that and you hope to either recoup some of that draft capital or you let Sam walk at the comp pick, but you work on your next reclamation project with whether it's Daniel Jones or some other free agent. So that's kind of what do you think about the Darnold McCarthy? Obviously, we'd love to see McCarthy become an elite rookie quarterback, but how do you fit? It's kind of with the injury and the cap situation, it becomes a complicated question.
Yeah, you're braver than me, first of all, for actually putting out a take during the time where everybody was like, "Well, the Vikings gotta extend Sam Darnold, right? Like, there's no way they can't extend Sam Darnold." And now, after 2 games, everybody's opinion on that completely flipped, right? And it's just I purposely held out giving like an actual take on Sam Darnold after the season at that time frame because I wanted to see how the playoff goes. Because like we've done this long enough to know that people's opinion on teams completely flips after a single playoff game. Like it's frustrating and it probably shouldn't be that way. And I think that your take really from that time hasn't changed on Sam Darnold. I don't think my takes changed on Sam Darnold. Now, I guess I will say, I think Sam can be a quality starting NFL quarterback. I think he earned the right to get a Baker Mayfield or a Geno Smith type contract. The problem is the Vikings timeline doesn't align with giving Sam Darnold a Baker Mayfield or Geno Smith type contract. And honestly, personally, from a team building perspective, that's not something I want to do. I want to try to shoot the moon at quarterback, right? I want to try to get one of the, let's say, 7 to 10 guys who can win a Super Bowl if you put the right pieces around them. And I to be fair to Sam, like he had one extremely good year after having absolutely no support, having a really, really rough start to his career, right? Like I don't think that the quarterback we saw in 2014 is the best quarterback that Sam Darnold can possibly be, right? I think there's room for growth there. And I know there's been a history among Vikings fans of like specifically a Kirk Cousins fan existing, right? I think everybody who listens to this pod and is on Twitter can probably think of one specific person. If I were a Sam Darnold fan, I would be rooting so hard for the Vikings to give Sam Darnold that Baker Mayfield contract because I think they are the best environment for him to do that. If I'm a Sam Darnold fan, my secondary hope is that the Rams decide to move on from Matthew Stafford and that they go for Sam Darnold in the free agent market, right? I truly think there's more to unlock with him, but also I don't know where that ceiling is if there is like if you still reach the point where you're not getting one of those guys, right? And I think that it's a risk that I'm not willing to take for the Vikings to extend him long term. The tag him and keeping him around for a year, I don't have a ton of appetite for that either because it's a major, major impediment to JJ McCarthy starting. And like, I think guys can sit, but I also think if they're ready to get reps, they should get reps. Like, I don't know if Jordan Love's sitting for 3 full seasons. He had an up and down last year, right? Like if he has another additional season under his belt, maybe he's a little bit better previously, right? Like using Jordan Love as, oh, this guy sat forever and is a phenomenal quarterback. Well, first of all, he's not really all that phenomenal of a quarterback, but like also there's diminishing returns on how long you sit, I think, right? And there's maybe a fair argument to be made there with McCarthy not being able to practice all last year, but like honestly, I just have a lot of faith in the Vikings to get the decision right. So it would kind of shock me if they tagged Sam Darnold and kept him for a year just with the way they've talked about all of this, right? The tag and trade option, I would love to be able to execute, and the Vikings have a lot better understanding of what they're going to be able to get for Sam Darnold than I do. But I just don't think you're going to get enough from somebody else who says, okay, we need to trade you draft capital and we need to pay him $40 million, which sets the minimum for a contract extension of $40 million a year. Like, if you have a guy that gets $40 million guaranteed on the tag, it sets the minimum. Sam Darnold can also do a couple different things, right? He can refuse to sign the tag, which means the Vikings can't trade him. right? But he has a window to sign the tag still. And then the Vikings would have $40 million tied up in cap space unless they rescinded the tag on him. But if he signs the tag right away, now they're stuck if they can't find a trade partner, right? So now they're stuck paying him the tag if they can't find a valid trade partner. So there's like a fair amount of risk to tagging him, and that risk is having him on your roster for $40 million to be a backup, aka the Atlanta Falcons plan, I guess. Um, but so this all leads me to say the Vikings should probably have him just let him walk. Although honestly, with how many outside pieces, and we're going to talk about the Vikings needs that the Vikings have, it may be prudent just to tag him and trade him for less than like a third round pick or something like that, if they're able to swing that, to not have to worry about waiting for the comp pick next year, because you're going to have to work some magic with this comp formula, I think, to be able to get up there. We're going to talk about the impending free agents. Just a lot of the impending free agents don't really seem like compensatory guys to me as part of the issue. So if you're trying to bring in outside talent, which I think we both want to do, and the Vikings have the cap space to do, to be most competitive in that market, you need to pay top dollar. You need to pay top dollar early on. Otherwise, you're getting Shaq Griffin late, who was a great addition, or Stephon Gilmore very late in the process, but they're not long-term pieces for this team, which is, I think, what we want when we're trying to build it out, right? So my preference, I guess, overall, is to let Sam Darnold walk and figure out a way to ensure that you get the number 97 overall pick, right? Like we're getting this year for Kirk Cousins. But I see the avenue of tag and trade as valid if the Vikings are able to drum up the market for that. There's also the player consideration, right? Like the Vikings have been very player forward in the way they approach these negotiations, right? They don't want to put Darnold in a bad spot, I think, just to help with their player negotiations down the line. So it would be interesting to me if they tagged him at all. If they tagged him with the intent of trading with him, it would be interesting to me because I think Darnold and his agent would have to have an implicit understanding that that was going to happen when they tagged him, which would be difficult to navigate from the front office perspective, right? So all of this points to me that the Vikings are going to let him walk. Obviously, we can wait 3 weeks, 2 weeks, or whatever and see, but there's at least a little bit of speculation there. So I think we're both on let Sam Darnold go somewhere else where he can be a starter and try to keep Daniel Jones if we can. Do you have any outside options that are like, I would really prefer this guy to Daniel Jones or this guy to Nick Mullins, or is it just kind of keep it in house?
I mean, I've always kind of loved Jameis. I think Daniel Jones makes sense. Not different. Well, I don't want to say the same play style as McCarthy, but I feel like um, they already have chemistry, or at least I hope they would, from already sharing the quarterback room last year. It's already somebody we made an effort to make part of the culture, which Kevin O'Connell obviously prioritizes to great effect. So it kind of makes sense to stay in house. We have a lot of good in house options. I feel like Daniel Jones was his his shadowing year, his internship, and now we get a chance to see if we can actually get him part as the Kevin O'Connell reclamation project. So I think you can start there, but there are other guys out there who I like and who I think Kevin O'Connell could tap into. I'm not dipping out there into the Stafford trade market as much as I like Stafford. But there are other options. But we kind of have an embarrassment of good options between Darnold, and you could talk me into seeing, okay, but that was year one. Let's see, he's not done growing yet. Let's see, he's still young. He's 26. So you could talk me into the value of that, especially if what if McCarthy's a bust? We just don't know. Obviously it doesn't look like that. But you just don't know really.
Yeah.
So there's value, I think, even at the extremely high price tag of $40 million fully guaranteed. But yeah, I agree with you. I'm kind of chalk. Let Darnold walk. Probably re-sign Jones to a cheap, less than what is that, 10-figure deal. In the $4 million range or
Yep.
whatever, 5 million. I don't think he'll have a huge market. I guess he was a starting quarterback, so it's always possible. But Daniel Jones is not the quarterback market's kind of a game of musical chairs, and Daniel Jones is probably not top 32. So I think he's probably going to get a cheap market. And I don't mind if, in case we're priced out of Daniel Jones in a strange world. I'm with you. I think Nick Mullins is a perfectly fine backup. So yeah, I think there's a lot of agreement there.
By the way, 10 figures is $1 billion. So I also agree with you. We should not pay Daniel Jones $1 billion. Now, so
8 figures. Thank you.
yeah, the so if we flip it over next to the biggest hole that the Vikings will have on their roster heading into free agency, to me, is the cornerback room, right? And that's because literally everybody who played a snap last year for the Vikings, technically not, because Caleb Evans played a couple snaps and Dwight McGlothern played a couple snaps, but like 99.95% of the snaps for the Vikings cornerbacks are hitting free agency. That's Byron Murphy, that's Stephon Gilmore, that's Shaq Griffin, and Fabian Moreau as well, right? Who is like the fourth corner. Obviously the last three were all veteran stopgap options. Like, I'm pretty sure they added Moreau and Gilmore. They definitely added Gilmore during training camp. Moreau was like the eve of training camp that they added him. And obviously Shaq Griffin affected our comp formula, but he was like the day before the draft kind of signing, right? Like, he wasn't a first wave of free agency guy. Byron Murphy, they pushed back his void date so they could have more time to negotiate an extension. They notably did not do that for Stephon Gilmore, who also had void years on his contract. That's not too surprising to me. I don't think it's really prohibitive to bring Stephon Gilmore back, because if you want to bring Stephon Gilmore back, to me, that's another, oh, we don't have any corners on the eve of camp, so we're going to pay Stephon Gilmore $7 million to play very well, right? For me, what I would like to do, I would love to bring back Byron Murphy and then one of Gilmore or Griffin, to be honest with you, just to shore that up. I mentioned the Vikings don't have returning corners. They do have Dwight McGlothern, and they do have Mekhi Blackman coming back from the torn ACL, right? But I just don't know if you can count on Blackman, and I think the improvement of the Vikings cornerback room from 2023 to 2024 kind of tells you a little bit about the level, or the overall improvement of the Vikings defense kind of tells you a little bit about some of the level. A lot of it was like a Caleb Evans and stuff, but also Mekhi Blackman was like pretty shaky, like, and our willingness to play man coverage, was non-existent in 2023, got a lot better in 2024. So I don't have a ton of faith in him to be like a bona fide starter right away. So I really think you need to add 3 starters to this room. What would you do with the corner room, Nick?
Yeah, I was really happy along with you to see that they extended the Murphy's 2024 contract just to prevent the void years kicking in, but also that just shows that they're negotiating in good faith right now, which, they let Sam Darnold's contract void. They let, as you mentioned, some of the other guys' contracts
And
void.
to be clear with Darnold, they had to let his contract void to be able to apply the franchise tag. So if they wanted that as a mechanism, it had to void on the day that it did.
Yeah. But it's nice to see that they're pounding something out, hopefully, with Murphy. He's a weird one to price out because he plays mostly nickel, but he's capable of playing outside, and he's a Pro Bowler. But would he be a Pro Bowler if he were exclusively outside? Like, you don't think of him in the Sauce Gardner tier of corners. So, but yeah, I think he's, assuming you are on board with Darnold. Hey, doggy. For the audio listeners, that we had just had a doggy visitor.
Yeah. Hi, Ziggy.
For oh my goodness, getting
I
dog
need to mute
kisses on
myself.
you podcast listeners are missing out. You YouTube, this is why YouTube is the superior medium, other than being subjected to my face. Um, uh, well, before I got on the dog tangent, yeah, Byron Murphy, I think so long as you agree to Darnold not being, you have to I think Murphy is the most important free agent on the roster that the Vikings could lose. You got to re-sign him. He's a I don't want to overstate him, but he's an above average starting cornerback. And this is a team with, unless you are really high on Najee Thompson playing actual corner or like Mekhi Blackman coming back, like they don't have any corners. Brian Flores can do some crazy things, but like you got to have Murphy. And I think I agree with you. You got to add 2 more because these guys get injured and even your number 4 ends up playing a ton of snaps. So I'm with you on Gilmore. Love him, but he wasn't that good, and he's turning 35 this year. So the former defensive player of the year, I could go either way. Because he's 35, he's also going to be cheap. I would not mind bringing him back, but I wouldn't want to pencil him in as a starter. I'd be fine with him as like the number 4 guy. Shaq Griffin, I like Shaq Griffin. I kind of don't know what his market will be like. If he gets into like the $10 million range, I'm not really interested. If it's below 5, sure, but I kind of don't know because he was like a corner, but he wasn't that good. But he was like fine enough to start. But I kind of don't know. But he wasn't like a good starter, so it's hard to
Yeah,
price out.
to me, and I might be out on a limb compared to some of the other guys in the Viking space, but I thought Gilmore was a better player than Griffin last year, and I think that shows in the snap counts. But like Griffin's 30 and Gilmore's going to be like 35, right? So that definitely matters. But there was a reason that when one of the corners was coming off the field, it was Griffin instead of Gilmore. Like I think he ended up with easier assignments. I do think he was probably a little bit stickier in man coverage, but also I think he had easier assignments because he was their third option at the position. Um, and you know, they were all kind of up and down. Like it would oscillate kind of game by game who had some issues. And Murphy wasn't perfect either, but I think he is a very good, high quality starter. And that's something they simply need at the position, right? Like he's a guy you can build out with 2 other good starters and have a really, really good unit. I think like he can be your number 1 guy, assuming you have, you know, at least competent play at the other positions. Like we did this year. I mean, that's basically why the Vikings defense was as good as it was because Murphy was capable of being the number 1 guy and the other guys were good enough. They weren't phenomenal, but they were more than good enough, I think.
Yeah, no, totally. It's a weak link system. So while it helps to have a Surtain or a who name your Pro Bowl corner, having somebody who can't get picked on makes a big difference, especially when you're trying to do some more man coverage looks, which Flores obviously coming from the Belichick tree would love to do, and we saw him start to do some of that. So, and I guess Fabian Moreau throw him in as well. He's turning 31, I think. But was surprisingly solid for somebody who was kind of a career journeyman backup practice squad type. So again, if it's like a free contract, I say sign him up to and by free I mean like vet minimum, and so that if he gets cut, he just is replaced by somebody else on the roster. Like I'm totally for bringing in Moreau and seeing if he can make the roster in camp. So. But yeah, regardless of what you think of whether these guys are kept or go, I think this has to be to preview later on in the podcast. This has to be one of the Vikings' top needs, just based on they can't really field a cornerback room right now. So
Yeah, right. They physically don't have enough guys to like put 3 quarterbacks on the field. So um no, but if we move to the next one, you know, it's safety, right? Is the other big money free agent that's potentially leaving in Cam Bynum. There's also Harrison Smith in this category, which if I understand Harrison Smith's contract correctly, it's the contract can be voided, but it does not automatically void. What will happen if the Vikings take no action is Harrison Smith will have a minimum base salary in 2025. And if that's the case, they're basically going to hold that minimum base salary until after June 1st. Harrison Smith will retire, and then they get the cap benefit because there's void years tacked onto the end of it, essentially where the cap gets pushed out into next year. But if he wants to play, I think they're great. And I don't know if they control the void or if he controls the void or who's kind of in charge there. But I think they will void the deal and he'll be a free agent. Whether he ends up coming back here, you know, is one thing, or he might decide he wants to go somewhere else. Right. Or I guess there's a world where he could play on a minimum, but that doesn't seem very likely to me. Right. So Cam Bynum, and then also Theo Jackson's a restricted free agent, right? Kind of the 4th safety on the depth chart. So Cam Bynum, Harrison Smith. I guess give a quick opinion on what you think Harrison Smith will do, and then Theo Jackson. What do you think on those 3 guys?
yeah, Harrison Smith is tough. Obviously, been just kind of a Hall of Fame caliber player, one of my favorite players to watch. He's not a bad player right now, but I'm not sure he's still good enough to start over Bynum and Metellus, who are very good safeties in their own right. Flores obviously crazy enough to find a way to get three, even four safeties on the field a lot, but with Smith, that's a little bit harder because he was never a man coverage guy, and that gets particularly true as you get older and your hips get a little less fluid. So he almost becomes like an apex player or like a tiny linebacker. He can still be a good player. I think it probably depends on what Flores has in mind for the defense as to can they continue to get Smith a lot of snaps. But all that said, based on his reaction in the locker room, I do think he's probably leaning towards retirement at this point, and I think that makes sense for the Vikings as well. Not that he can't play anymore, but just that I just don't know how many snaps they're going to be able to give him. So that's kind of where I stand on Harry. On Bynum, I think he's an obvious re-sign unless you think there are targets in the safety market, and I can think of one in particular that you would prefer over Bynum. But I think Bynum's a good player. He and Metellus have done a lot of really good things together. They really understand the defense. And for Brian Flores, I think having smart players who know the system matters a lot. And this is not a simple defense to run. He throws a lot of crazy looks at offenses. That means as a defense, you have to do a lot of your homework here. So I like the chemistry and I like keeping Bynum. Theo Jackson, I would do the tender. He's been good enough to get snaps. He beat out Lewisine in camp, and he's a um, I've always been pleasantly surprised when he gets snaps and then seeing him on the L-22 being like, oh, you usually expect a bit of a drop off, but he's been good. So yeah, that's kind of I would try and keep Bynum unless you are replacing him in free agency. Smith, I think, is probably retiring. Could see it go the other way, but probably. And then Jackson, yeah, RFA tender.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I want to keep Bynum, bring him back on a market extension, right? Whether that's like $15 million a year or something, and then Theo Jackson to me is the third safety heir apparent. So he's the guy who's going to be replacing the role that Harrison Smith does. I don't think he's going to do it up to the level that Smith does necessarily, but like you mentioned, as you age, Harrison Smith isn't the first team all pro player that he should have been for the majority of his career, even if he didn't get voted for that, right? So I think Theo Jackson is kind of the answer to that additional safety hole with Harrison Smith potentially leaving. And like you, I think my expectation is kind of that he retires. Would absolutely love to have him back. Would love to have all three of these guys back, right? And then you don't have to worry about depth if one of the top guys gets hurt, if Theo Jackson doesn't have to be a starter, right? But I think probably the path is I would expect to see Bynum, Metellus, and Theo Jackson getting the majority of the snaps next year. I don't know if that's going to be the night because the past 2 years, right? Bynum, Smith, and Metellus, fortunately, they really haven't had injuries, but all have played 90+% of the snaps in 2023 and 2024, right? I don't know if Theo Jackson approaches a 90% snap level, but I bet it'll be over 50%, especially depending on what the Vikings are able to do at corner, right? To me, bringing those guys back or if you don't bring him back, you need to find a clear alternative, like a clear starting caliber player in free agency if you're not, for some reason, able to make a deal work with Cam Bynum. Like, I'd be shocked if they're not able to make a deal work with Cam Bynum, but that's kind of where we're at. So, that's the three major conversations, right? There are a couple other starters sprinkled in, but we kind of want to run through it a little bit more quickly for the rest of the positions. The first is going to be running back. Aaron Jones obviously is a starter. Cam Akers is the backup. Both of them are becoming free agents. That'll leave the Vikings with just Ty Chandler, I believe. I don't know if Myles Gaskin was still kicking around somewhere. I forget at the end of the season. I don't even know who they might have had on the practice squad. But Aaron Jones also pushes Void Date back to work on a contract extension with the Vikings, right? So that's a positive sign there. But just give quick yes or no on Aaron Jones and Cam Akers being back.
Yes to both, especially with Jones. I mean, it would be a yes even if this weren't the case, but the free agent market for running backs, I don't know if you guys have checked, is terrible. Dobbins
Oh,
is
it's
like the other
terrible.
guy. Najee Harris, you're looking at maybe is Nick Chubb still and he still run like it obviously a phenomenal player, but dislocated his knee. So yeah, Jones I think is an easy re-sign. Just got to figure out the money for a guy over 30. And Akers, it's not just that one catch, but the catch that secured was it the Packers victory.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, that 4th and 3. Yeah.
he just does a lot of little things right. He's not the first round pick. He doesn't have the juice that he used to after his injuries, but he just does a lot of things right. There's a lot of value to that in an offense. So I think, especially for backup money, I think they're both easy re-signs and maybe try and get more juice in the future of the position in the draft.
Yeah, I'm a definite yes on Aaron Jones. Like, I think he's the best back on the market, on the free agent market. So you want to get the best back on the market. Cam Akers, I'm more wishy washy on. Like, I don't really care either way. I don't think he's that great of a running back, to be honest. Like, to your point, he has made some big plays, but the consistency is just not there. Like, I don't want to see him getting a bunch of carries. So you can keep him on the roster, failing, being able to get somebody in the draft, which it's supposed to be like a great running back draft. But I don't think you can exit free agency having just Ty Chandler or just Ty Chandler and Cam Akers on the roster, right? I think it has to be Aaron Jones, or you take a shot on one of the guys with like injury questions, like a J.K. Dobbins or Nick Chubb. Um, so yeah, that's kind of that on the running back position. We're just kind of going offensive positions, defensive positions, right? So next is wide receivers. The only two significant free agents are Brandon Powell and Trent Sherfield. So answers on those guys, Nick.
I'll go more rapid fire. Powell, I think, is an easy yes. Sherfield, no. I don't really care though.
Yeah, the Vikings need a punt returner, so Powell's that until proven otherwise. Sherfield, I'm fine with. Like, I thought he added utility as a blocking wide receiver. He's a special teamer as well. Like, he was pretty solid as a punt gunner, in my opinion, like the best one the Vikings have on the team. So like, I like that skill set. The Vikings don't necessarily have a blocking receiver skill set, but he's interchangeable to me. So it's like, whatever. Third string tight end, Kevin O'Connell's favorite player on the Minnesota Vikings. Well, maybe Cam Akers is Kevin O'Connell's favorite player on the Minnesota Vikings, but maybe his second favorite player, Johnny Munt. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, probably. He's a good third tight end, but they lost Nick Muse, so sure, why not?
Yeah, it's okay to be wishy-washy on these, right? Like, the Vikings need a third tight end. Johnny Munt has been good. Don't cut Josh Oliver and make Johnny Munt your second tight end. Don't do that. Um, all right. Swing tackle. Also something the Vikings maybe don't have on the roster. Cam Robinson's leaving. And David Questenberry is also a free agent and 35.
Robinson, I expect to be priced out. At least I hope it, because it'd be nice to get a third round comp pick for somebody
Sure
who's going to
would.
get starting level money. Um, but if that's not where, if it's like a Daniel Jones, sorry, you're just outside the musical chairs, like would be fine would be great to have him back as like a swing tackle that good. I just assume he's too expensive, so that's a no. Questenberry he's not good enough. If he's in there, we've got a problems. And we saw this when Cam Robinson got hurt too. Like Questenberry came in and was immediately terrible. And the fact that when Darisaw went down, Questenberry they knew was not good enough to ride out the rest of the season. Like you got to upgrade at swing tackle, or you got to try to. So for that reason, I think Questenberry, like, not the worst thing in the world. They bring him back for nothing, but like I just don't think that is a good enough backup swing tackle. So, and you don't want to be in a situation where you have to trade for somebody else again next year. So hopefully they can upgrade the position.
Yeah, when you have to trade midseason because you know a guy's not going to be good enough to be a starter for 8 games, like, he probably shouldn't be your primary backup at the position. So totally on board there. No to Questenberry, age and all that stuff. Cam Robinson, just like you said, look, if he costs like $2 million, I'd love to bring Cam Robinson back. He's going to cost like 15 probably. So not going to happen. Um, right guard, or interior offensive line. The Vikings have Dalton Risner, who obviously started the right guard for the remainder of the season after they benched Ed Ingram, and Dan Feeney, who played 0 snaps because despite the benching, the Vikings interior offensive line, the intended starters, misses 0 snaps all season. It's kind of an interesting fact.
Yeah, wow. Who would have thought? The one position where we probably wouldn't have missed it as much. No shade there. Reisner, however you say his name. I've gone both
Yeah.
ways. I am. thinking you can probably upgrade just looking at the number of other guards out there. So I would, it's not the worst thing, but I see him more as like backup quality. Actually, we've had enough actual backup quality guards in our Vikings fandom history. So he's like a below average starter to me. Feeney, I think, is a was excited for him back when he was drafted, but not the Vikings. But I wish the Vikings had drafted. But since then, like, he's not a starting caliber NFL player, so I don't feel strongly either way. If they want to keep him, fine. Cooper's done a great job with the offensive line, so kind of defer to them. But don't have strong feelings about Feeney. So I guess I would say no on both.
Yeah, I'm also no to both. We've done the Reisner. Yeah, I actually don't know. For 2 years now, and it ended up not great last year. Like that offensive line was not great, and he was a part of that problem, especially in the run game. Like very much, especially in the run game. So he's a no to me. Feeney is also a I don't care. Like you said. So we'll move on to the defense here. We have the interior defenders. I noted this as rundown interior defenders, right? Jonathan Bullard and Jerry Tillery.
Yes to both. Yeah, I mean, the Vikings defensive line coach has done great things with all these guys. I love watching Bullard on tape, and Tillery was such a pleasant surprise this year. So coming from a guy who kind of, I don't want to label him a draft bust, but kind of never lived up to that draft stock, bounced around a few teams. It was legitimately like a very solid. I don't know if he was technically a starter with Phillips and Bullard, but Tillery was good. So I liked his tape, and it wasn't as crazy and at all over the place as I was used to seeing from him. So both of these are yes from me, assuming, of course, that these guys are going to be cheap, which interior defensive linemen often aren't. But I think if they continue on their current salary positions or cap hits as they were in 2024, I think it's an easy yes to both.
Yeah, so I'm a yes to Bullard and a no to Tillery because I prefer Jalen Redmond in Tillery's job. Um, and I honestly prefer what, and we'll get to outside guys, but I honestly prefer an outside free agent in Jerry Tillery's job. Um, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. But Jonathan Bullard is a must re-sign to me. Like his early down run defense contribution is huge for the Vikings, and I don't think you're gonna find that with an outside free agent who fits the system, who's going to be as cheap as Bullard, right? Like, um, yeah. So that's kind of that. Third down interior pass rush. Jihad Ward, right? Like Jihad Ward, okay, is labeled as an edge rusher. He rushed, first of all, he never played on rundowns. He played like 80%. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit deep into this. He played like 80 to 90% on pass downs, and he played 80 to 90% of those snaps inside the tackles as an interior pass rusher, right? He is a designated interior pass rusher, is what his role was for the Vikings. And he was pretty good at it, right? But yes or no on Jihad Ward?
No, I think you can do better. He was better than I expected him to be, but I think you can upgrade in free agency just looking at some of these names.
Yeah, I would prefer to spend big on an outside free agent. Lacking not being able to spend big, like I thought he was a decent player for the Vikings. Like I think they got more than what they paid for him last year. So I would be willing to bring him back if you don't find something, but I would rather find somebody better. Is kind of my take. So rotational edge rusher, Pat Jones. Yes or no?
No, for the same reason I was a no on Wanham. He's a good player and an ascending player and probably has more development out. I mean, I think Pat Jones really took um, leaps and bounds this year. But you spent a first rounder on Dallas Turner. You still have Van Ginkel and so I would say no because I think people are going to see what was it, the 8 sacks, and they're going to pay him big money. He's not going to be worth that level of money. So they have other horses in the stable.
Go get $7 million a year from the Carolina Panthers, just like every other Vikings rotational edge. Yeah,
Amen.
absolutely. Go get your money, Pat Jones, please. I like you, but you're not going to get as much money here as you are elsewhere. So, um, yeah, the only linebacker who I guess is a free agent, not that the Vikings have many off-ball linebackers in general, is Kamu Grugier Hill. Thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, he was not really somebody I even, like, knew that much about going into the season, and then he played really well. So, yeah, I think he's, I don't know if he's locked in as the 3rd linebacker, but I wouldn't hate it if he were. So, yeah, I think he's an easy re-sign.
Prove to me you have a better option before not re-signing him. Also, he's a core special teamer, right? He plays a ton of special team snaps, and that's valuable on a football team. That's why he's in his 30s and still playing in the NFL, despite not being a starting linebacker, right? Like that's how that happens. So then the final one, the punter, Ryan Wright.
No, didn't get it done this year. Time to upgrade. There aren't a lot of I don't know if you've seen the punter free agents, it's not great, but they gotta figure out something better. It was not great last year.
At least bring him in competition, right? Like I think he's an RFA, so you can tender him, right? And just be like, all right, we're gonna bring somebody else in, and we'll see how this goes, right? I think that's kind of the way you got to do it. But I agree. Like, if he's our starting punter next year, it should be because our plan B failed, right? Or our plan A failed, right? And he's our plan B. Um, so,
Yeah, good way of putting it.
uh, so yeah, that's pretty much everybody of note on the Vikings. Jeremy Flax, who is like a practice squad offensive lineman, I think is also on the list of free agents. I don't know anything about him, so they'll probably just bring him back for the practice squad. But we're gonna go into Vikings needs, and then we're gonna talk about some outside potential guys that fit probably the needs we're gonna talk about, and then we're gonna go into some guys we've targeted rather than the most talked about guys as like an expensive option and maybe a cheap option for each of the positions. So, do you want to go first with your list of 5 needs, Nick, in order? If you ranked them in order?
Yeah, no, yeah, no, totally. And the way I actually approached this is I looked at how much these guys cost. Um, and I use that to approximate value because, like, for example, punter is a big need on the roster. It's not on my top 5 lists because punters don't get paid that much.
Yeah.
And for the same reason, running back is a little bit lower, despite the fact that, this is assuming they might even figure. By the way, I'm also approaching this assuming they figure things out with their current in-house free agents. So it's not like if they just let everybody in the cornerback room walk, that's a problem. But
Sure.
I'm assuming they're not going to just do that. So anyway, I would put defensive interior defender first, defensive tackles, just because the top of the market is $30 million a year or more. And right now they've got a lot of really solid guys. But if you look at this, you look at this roster and compare it to other rosters, they kind of don't have anybody. And it sure would be nice looking at some of the names out there right now to have one of those guys because these play as good as like Phillips, Bullard, and everybody are. These guys, if you get a good one, you're going to get 70% of the defensive snaps. So you're providing a pretty substantial upgrade right there. And right now, I think it's fair to say that the talent pool there is below average compared to most teams. And I would put cornerback second there in the same tier, only below it because corners make almost half as much as the top interior defenders make. And then I would put guard and running back in the same tier as each other. Guard a little bit more pressing, depending on what you want to do with the right guard position, and running back more pressing long term because long term and short term because Jones you can never count on him to play 17 games or 100% of snaps, and long term because Jones is on the wrong side of 30. And then after that, I would put safety. It's not really a need if they re-sign Cam Bynum, but because they don't have them and because they like to use 3, it's worth mentioning. And then I would also put wide receiver 3 because they want to upgrade from Jalen Naylor or who do we just talk about?
Sherfield and Powell and those guys.
Powell, but then Powell's like a perfectly like I don't mind Powell being out there as a wide receiver 4, but given the value it provides to the team and how valuable wide receivers are, I put that as our last one. So that's where I rank them. Defensive tackle, corner, guard, running back, wide receiver 3/safety.
Yeah, I actually like Naylor as like a wide receiver 3, and maybe it's a little bit of wide receiver 3 by committee, right? Because he's kind of a role specific player as somebody who you want more threatening vertically. But I like that as a wide receiver 3 option, right? Like having that vertical stretch and letting Justin Jefferson work underneath him, or being able to attack over the top maybe more accurately when Justin Jefferson is drawing coverage underneath, I think is a valuable skill set. So I don't want to push him away entirely, but I agree with you that you need to complement that with somebody like Brandon Powell, who can win underneath in short yardage, and also a guy who has a little bit more blocking, which was Trent Sherfield. Like that was the ideal last year. Um, and the reason I'm spending a little bit of time on that is because that was the only one on your list that I don't have on my list, right? So we could quibble about the rankings order, but I think it's pretty clear. And I don't think any of this is a surprise, right? I think if you ask Vikings fans, it would almost be unanimous in terms of the top 5. So my number 1 was corner. And I guess I treated it a little bit differently from you. Kind of my thought process is like, what do I want the Vikings to most spend their first round pick on at this point? As kind of the biggest need. Now the thing with corner is if they re-sign Byron Murphy, I think that goes down in the priority quite a bit, but I'm less confident in them re-signing Byron Murphy just because I think we'll have a pretty robust market on the open market than I am in them signing like Cam Bynum or somebody like that, right? So that's kind of why that's my number 1. And I have interior offensive line as my number 2, right? Specifically guard, but like, I like my ideal would be to like basically try to become the Eagles offensive line, right? Where you have 2 monster guards flanking. It used to be Jason Kelsey and now it's Cam Jurgens, undersized centers. I think you kind of see this elsewhere in the league as well. Like the Falcons kind of have that going on. Like I know Drew Dahlman's like a hot name as somebody for the Vikings to pursue in free agency. I think we'd have the same problems with Drew Dahlman at center if we brought him in that we do with Bradbury personally. Um, Interior defensive line was my 3rd. And I agree with you. I guess my argument would be I think the Vikings can get by with the interior defensive line play that they had last year. So it's a little bit more of a luxury for me, but it is something I would like to see them upgrade. Safety was number 4, just because you got to be thinking about this. And safety is the one that I think easily could not be a need come draft day, right? If the Vikings re-sign Cam Bynum and that, so it might be entirely off this list. And then running back was my number 5. So those kind of top 3, like corner, interior offensive line, and interior defensive line are kind of the same thing for me because our quarterback room is untenable because we don't have players in it right now, right? And our interior offensive line is untenable because I don't like the players that they have there right now. And our interior defensive line is untenable because we can't get pressure with our interior pass rushers. Um, so those kind of are on the same tier of need for me. I wrote an article ranking the needs for the Vikings for zone coverage, and I had corner number 1 just because they literally don't have anybody on the roster. So it's like obviously they need to address it, but that's a semantical argument, right? And then safety and running back, I think are kind of in that second tier where you need to pay Cam Bynum a lot of money, but I think that's a pretty easy decision to make. So those are the major positions. We kind of mentioned that running back has no good free agency options, but I did come up with one free agency option that I feel like I've seen talked about online the most for each of the other positions, right? Like when you reference guys that are on the wish list for Vikings free agency, I think these are the guys that are talked about, right? We'll start with interior offensive line first. Trey Smith, the guard from Kansas City, right? Nick, do you have thoughts on Trey Smith? Like if you would like to see the Vikings go out and spend the $20 million a year to get him, or is he a tight, like, are you cool with the idea of a guard, but Trey Smith's just not your guy? Or you just don't want him at all? What's kind of your thought process?
I guess I have mixed feelings for a couple reasons. The reason to like him is he's a very solid guard and has been since he came into the league. And he's very young for a free agent. I think he'll be 25 this season. Obviously, bad taste in your mouth from that playoff run in the Eagles game, the Super Bowl. But he's a good player, and it sure would be nice to get a young right guard and just plug him in there and say, hole patched or whatever. Like we know this guy, Smith is going to be reliable. So I guess that's the reason to do it. The reason personally, I would vote more towards the nay camp for Trey Smith is one, I'm not sure he has the juice for an outside zone scheme, and I know there's been some like shifting identity. I really see him as more of like a power guy, and so not the best scheme fit. Which maybe that's not the biggest deal in the world, but like it was the same kind of issue with Reisner, where like he's not good for the run scheme, and that kind of limits him a little bit. But the main reason is like if I have $20 million, I just don't want to spend it on a guard. There are other guys, especially when you have an offensive line coach like Chris Cooper, who's proven the ability to like coach a lot of guys up. I don't think you need to get the very best guard on the market. I know we have some like guard PTSD here, but I feel like there are cheaper options on the market um, where you could get a lot more bang for your buck, even if Smith is probably the best guard on the market. So for that reason, I'm not like I get it, and I get why Vikings fans gravitate towards it. I'm just not sure I see the fit and the value for me personally.
Yeah, I'm not all in on Smith either. Honestly, my probably preferred guard strategy would be to try to get a starter in the mid tier of free agency and then draft a guy, like try to fill all of your other holes through free agency as well and take the guy with the first round pick that you have. Like I think and I don't know, I haven't like looked at this at all, but the hit rate on available interior offensive linemen in that 20-ish range, the mid 20s, kind of feels to me like the sweet spot for where you want a guy. I think of like Tyler Smith for the Cowboys. I think of the center that the Bucks drafted last year from Duke, Graham Barton. And there are some other guys in that range who I think have panned out really well, which is where I would be targeting. And I think it's generally considered to be a pretty solid offensive line group in the draft. So that's probably my ideal free agency there, right? Where you're able to get a starter in free agency, because I think you need a starter in right guard. Like I don't think Ed Ingram is going to be the answer at right guard. And then you want to improve on Blake Brandel at left guard, because Brandel really fell apart when he had Cam Robinson not playing well next to him, right? Like he played well when Christian Darrisaw was there, but could not do it when he had Robinson next to him, right? So I think that's somebody who like ideally you need to upgrade. So, and I haven't watched draft prospects, right? But like Tyler Booker is like kind of the apple of my eye for that kind of decision making. Trey Smith, I think, to your point, the $20 million for the guard is rough, right? The $20 million paying the top of the market is kind of a problem when you have as many other needs as the Vikings do. Now, if they do it, I don't think I'd be upset by it, but I also just don't think that maybe he's the elite tier of player that like you're getting when you pay for the $20 million. And I'd be happy to be wrong about that, right? I'd be happy if you'd be an elite guard that you're paying $100 million, or whatever that contract needs to be. I just also know that the competition is going to be very strong for that thing, because offensive linemen like don't exist in free agency basically. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how it plays out. But the next target I had was interior defensive line, and that is Milton Williams, who was from the Eagles, right? And he's kind of became the darling for everybody with a great performance on the playoff run. And this is where I kind of get, I'm about 50-50 on it. I was actually pretty much all the way out on the idea of getting somebody like Milton Williams for this defense. And then I thought about it a little bit more and kind of dove into it a little bit more. So Jerry Tillery played about 40% of the snaps. Jihad Ward also played about 40% of the snaps for the Vikings. I went on a little mini rant about Jihad Ward playing like 80% or 90% pass rush snaps, right? But like Ward was the third down pass rush interior answer for the Vikings, because they didn't have anybody from the defensive tackle position good enough that they trusted to be able to do that, right? If you get a Milton Williams whose job is as a third down interior pass rusher, I think you can slide him into the Jihad Ward role. and get a good amount of production for him. Now, Jihad Ward had like a 10% pressure rate from the interior. Um, and like it's different if you look at PFF versus next gen stats, which is like NFL Pro stuff. But like Jihad Ward was like 10% pressure rate from the interior. Milton Williams was like 12%. Obviously better, but like not stunningly better, which is kind of interesting to me. PFF Williams was like way better. He was like 14 or 15%, while Ward was rounded up to 10%. Basically, it was like 9.9%. So, kind of two different data sets, both saying Williams is better. I don't know how much better. The thing is, I think you can get a similar level of production from what you got from Jerry Tillery in run defense than what you can get from Milton Williams, right? So if you combine those two positions into one player, and you'll need to add rotation in, like I'd like to see Jalen Redmond continue to get snaps, but on base downs, you can have a front of Harrison Phillips, Jonathan Bullard, and a Milton Williams, while on pass rush downs, the other two guys come off the field, Milton Williams stays on the field, hopefully, and Milton Williams is not a good run defender, to be clear. So that's kind of the problematic part I see with paying him a ton of money, but I've kind of sold myself on it by making him a role specific player. Now, do you pay a role specific player $20 million a year? That's where I really start to question it, right? Because he's like the fourth most dangerous option on the Eagles defense, right? At least the third behind Jalen Carter and Josh Sweat. Does he, and he has another guy who's a menace on the interior and Jalen Carter with him. Does that fall off when he goes to another team? That's kind of my big question with him, right? So I would love it if the Vikings were able to find a quality interior pass rusher. I just don't know if Milton Williams is going to be the answer to that problem. I think it is kind of where I land on it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think there are some other good names on the market. And I think the big question with Milton Williams is he going to be a 3-down player for you? Because he wasn't for the Eagles in any of his 4 years there. And that is, it's tough to shell out. I mean, he's probably, if he's as good as a lot of people think he's going to be, he's probably going to make 25 million, maybe even more than that, as a player. The reason, all that said, I'm on board with it is I just think he is a special kind of player, and you. At least as a pass rusher, which to me is a lot more valuable, and the Vikings just don't have that juice. And so I do think he would be a 3-down player, and he would just take the lumps in run defense because what he can do for you as a pass rusher, I think, is worth it. He was the number one graded interior defender as a pass rush player last year, including the playoffs, which is a little apples and oranges because not everybody played in the playoffs, but at the same time, beating up the Chiefs' offensive line, the playoff competition only gets better from that point. So his pass rush grade was second among all defenders, only to Myles Garrett. He was ahead of Micah Parsons, Chris Jones, TJ Watt. So that is some rarefied company, especially at 400 plus pass rush snaps. So it's not like it's a small sample size. He was this 20% rotational guy feasting on third downs. There was some of that in years prior, but he played a good amount of snaps for the Eagles last year. And the production is there. I do have questions about the fit, but the other thing, I guess the biggest reason I'm sold on it a little bit with Williams is he's still 25, he's turning 26, and the whole reason the Eagles drafted him was he was this very raw but extremely athletic. It's kind of like a Danielle Hunter story. Like his relative athlete score was like 9.98 or something. He had like a 39-inch vert at 285 pounds. He did some crazy stuff at the combine. So just a freak athlete. And the idea was like, well, freak athlete, but let's see if he can put it together. Well, now he's put it together. I mean, look at what he did in the Super Bowl. So that to me is worth it. And I trust our coaching staff. I mean, they made Jerry Tillery into a good run defender. He was not a good run defender before. So I am fine putting Milton Williams out there. And like worst case scenario, he's like a below average run defender and a very above average pass rusher. And so you get gashed maybe every once in a while. Instead of stopping things at the first level and run defense, you stop things at the second or third level. But in return, you're getting 60 pressures from your interior defender instead of 12. So to me, that's worth it. it'd be a lot of money, and I get why I think you make a really good, reasons to be cautious about it and not dive in and sign away all your money, but I get it. I get the Milton Williams hype, and I'm on board with it if it happens.
Yeah, you know, I I say all that where I am cautious, but I totally have sold myself on the idea of what he would do if we were on this team, right? And to me, that's not take away snaps from Jonathan Bullard. Like, I still think Jonathan Bullard plays 50% of the snaps in that scenario. But if you're giving or somewhere in the 40s to 50 range, and Harrison Phillips played about 60% of the snaps last year, you don't want an interior defender playing more than 70% of the snaps. It doesn't matter how much you're paying him. Like, you need to rotate these guys in and out. They're not 100% playtime types of players. So if you put Williams in that early down Tillery role, right, in some instances have him off the field when you think your opponent's likely to run, and just have him in the designated pass rush, and make sure he's in whenever you think you're going to need to rush the passer, like, that's a win. And you can get, 60 to 70% of the snaps out of that in the Vikings defense. When I kind of first started looking into it, like, I wasn't convinced you could get that many snaps out of that type of a player, because I don't want to take Bullard off the field for a player like Williams on early downs, just because I think it compromises the structure of the Vikings defense. But they also do a lot structurally to help guys in that Jerry Tillery role against the run, because they're not asked to take on like super difficult assignments. So I think that's kind of where you get the best of both worlds, to your point with playing him. So I have definitely sold myself more on it than I was like a week ago after I started looking into it a little bit. So that's Milton Williams. We'll move to the secondary now. The safety option, uh, the number one safety on the market, I think, kind of, and I'm sure somebody the Vikings have talked about a ton because of the Brian Flores connection, is Jevon Holland from the Miami Dolphins. So I guess the question is more, would you prefer Cam Bynum or Jevon Holland, Nick?
Yeah, to me, in a vacuum, spoiler to just come out with it, I would say Bynum. But Holland is a good safety. He had a bad year last year, and I haven't really studied his tape to have a strong take as to whether that's a one-off thing. But total deference here to Brian Flores. He knows him very well. If this is a situation where, like Andrew Van Ginkel flows like, I know this guy, I have a place for this guy, I'm totally on board if he brings him in. And if he says, hey, we've got a good things going here with Bynum, and that's the reason I kind of gravitate towards Bynum, is we know he can execute the defense at a high level. Why risk that? I think the reason you would do it is Holland really unlock, if you want to do like cover one, and he can really be your middle of the field Romer, Earl Thomas type role. He's very rangy, he's got great instincts, and so he can do a lot of things there, and that gives you, he's also like versatile, so you can do a lot of things with him. And I think more than you could do with Bynum, so it makes Brian Flores' defense a little, especially like that free safety, what they're capable of, has a big impact on what kind of crazy things you can throw out there, with your defense. So, I guess I could go either way here. I'm like 60-40. I just feel like Bynum's been doing it at a high level for a while, knows the defense, and this is a hard defense to learn. It's not the same defense Flores was running in Miami. But if Flores is confident in Holland, then I think Holland's a really good option too. It makes a lot of sense given the familiarity with Flores and what he likes to do on defense. So that's where I come out with Holland.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also a prefer Bynum in this case, but wouldn't have a problem. I actually think Holland offers like a pretty good amount of box versatility that Bynum is more of a true deep safety. Like, I like Bynum coming up against the run generally, but also like he is not going to be your Harrison Smith, like being a menace around the line of scrimmage generally, right? Like, I think Holland offers a little bit more versatility in that phase, but I just don't want to disrupt the good thing that the Vikings have going on defense. I think is the ultimate answer. It's clear that the pieces are working, and I think Bynum's ability to play the back end is a big part of the reason, like, you didn't see teams hit the Vikings over the top really on a consistent basis, like, at all this past season, right? Like that they really weren't able to throw posts or kind of deep throws over the top of this defense outside of like very specific, the cover zero blitz. There was like one or two busts on that, right? But that level of play is very important, and I think it's been a critical piece of kind of putting a roof on the defense for the Vikings, and I don't want to disrupt that. So I agree with you, kind of out on Jevon Holland as an option, but also there are so many good safety is maybe the strongest position group in free agency. And maybe that's a name recognition thing, right? And some of the guys aren't playing up to the caliber that they are. So, but I think the safety group is like really, really strong in free agency this year. So I think there are a lot of options that you could get away with it and are good answers. So the next player, and this is somebody I feel like Vikings fans have been after since week 5 because it's DJ Reed, the cornerback from the New York Jets. Thoughts on DJ Reed?
Yeah, I'm on board with DJ Reed. I think he's a really good corner. I think he's the kind what I look for in a corner is, can I trust this guy out there in man against a good wide receiver? And with DJ Reed, we saw it in person. He did a pretty good job locking up the Vikings receivers he went against in week 5. So, and not perfect, but like nobody ever was
No.
against Justin Jefferson and friends. But he's a good player, and he's not too old. He's 28, I think. And I feel like he gets a little underrated because Sauce gets all the attention. But he's a good corner. I think he's a number 1 corner in his own right. And so there's a little bit of a, not necessarily a discount, but I think there's some fans who aren't as, crazy on Vikings Twitter, who don't maybe don't appreciate how good of a corner, or at least I think DJ Reed is, just because he's playing opposite Sauce. And yeah, that helps. And the Jets generally have a good defense, but I think I remember watching the L-22, and he was just in phase with the Vikings receivers on a lot of snaps. And you never want to like bias yourself by like the one game that you remember against the team that you played. We see this in the pro, like teams often
Yeah.
sign teams that like he had one good game, it was against you, and so you guys go out and overpay for him. But I do think Reed I think the Jets trusted him to match up in man against some tough receivers. You don't see guys playing shadow coverage. A bad corner does not get asked to shadow good wide receivers. Reed did. So to me, yeah, I think that would be a huge upgrade to the team. Having him and Murphy would make me very confident in Brian Flores' defense. He's not the only cornerback out there, but he's probably my favorite of the ones out there. And so I do get the DJ Reed hype.
Yeah. So I really like DJ Reed as a player. If we re-sign Byron Murphy, he's not my first choice because he's 5'9", and we'd have 2 5'9" corners as our primary corner, and that scares me. Maybe that's hype bias, right? Like, I think he's a really good player. I think he overcomes that size deficit. If we start to, especially if like Mekhi Blackman is our third option, we don't have anybody tall on the roster. There's somebody else in free agency who we're going to bring up in a minute who I would prefer to DJ Reed. If Byron Murphy ends up walking, DJ Reed 100% all day, no questions asked, probably becomes the top corner on my list. It's just a very specific, maybe stupid concern, but like at some point, you can't have the entire cornerback room made up of nobody who's like 6 feet tall and doesn't have length, right? Um, that being said, I think he's a phenomenal football player, and I do think he's still roughly in his prime. He's like 28, right? So he's maybe on the older edge of that, but that's kind of what this cornerback market is. It's guys who are coming off of their second contracts, at least the ones who I think have potential to be a high level corners are the ones coming off their second contracts rather than first contract guys, right? That's Byron Murphy, that's DJ Reed, that's the mystery guy who I'll reveal in a minute. It's pretty obvious if you haven't guessed him, but so yes to DJ Reed, asterisk if we can't re-sign Byron Murphy. Otherwise, and he is I want to acknowledge, like, I'm not calling them the exact same player, right? Like, I think Reed is more of a boundary corner than Murphy is. Like he plays as a true boundary corner. It's just a general, okay, we have a guy who's 5'9", and another guy who's 5'9", and now we're going up against let's say which I think we have to play the Bengals next year, right? And we have to deal with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Well, one of those guys is going to have to be on T. Higgins, right? Who the Bengals are going to franchise tag. I imagine they'll find a way to keep. And we remember what T. Higgins did to us 2 years ago, right? Like, wasn't great. Wasn't actually, that was Caleb Evans, who's like 6'3", so we'll blame him, but still wasn't great. Wasn't great. Um, but yeah. So while we talked about these guys, I think if the Vikings sign any of those, I'm not complaining, right? But there are some more guys who I think we want to talk about. So we'll start and we'll go by your need list. Um, so why don't we go with interior defensive line first, Nick? I kind of put this as like a top number one high price option, and then maybe mid range or lower price free agents who you think could still be starters, maybe one or two of those guys. So interior defensive line, was Milton Williams your number one guy? Like, you'd be ecstatic if they signed him?
I I have questions, but I'd be very happy. Yeah, Milton Williams is my 1A. I'd also be very happy with Odigizua. He's kind of my 1B.
Yeah.
They're both young guys. Odigizua is your guy if you want somebody who you just are confident is going to play 70% of the snaps. He's a good run defender, and he's not a he's a good pass rusher too. I just think Milton Williams, because of his athleticism and because of how good he was last year, particularly in the playoffs against the best competitions, I think there's a little more pass rush juice, and just having missed that, I that's why Williams is the 1A. And then if you want to go, to somebody a little bit more on the cheaper side, you're thinking about who's going to replace Jihad Ward. I think Taylor Tart is an interesting name. He's still only 27. He's turning 28 very shortly. But I think he's got some pass rush juice. There's some questions about availability with him, but I think if you're going to go down, I think that's somebody who I think could have a material upgrade on your pass rush capabilities and still get a good number of snaps. I'm not worried about the ability of these guys to defend the run between Phillips and the in-house re-sign options with Bullard, and some of the other guys they have on the roster. So, and also shout out to Poona Ford. I don't think he necessarily makes sense with the composition of the roster, but I've always loved watching Poona Ford play. So I really like him too. So.
And he was awesome at football last year. Like, Poona Ford was incredible for the Chargers last year. They should bring him back.
Yeah.
But so my guys were Odigizua at the top, and I would honestly probably prefer Odigizua to Milton Williams because I think he did extremely good job in a lot worse environment than what Milton Williams is in. Like, the environment difference from the Eagles defensive line to any other defensive line in the league, right? Like, if we're being realistic, is a pretty solid drop off. Also, Odigizua was out there with absolutely nobody for half the season this past year because Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence was hurt, right? The Vikings have a guy who's a dominant pass rusher in Jonathan Grenard who can kind of help take some heat off of Odigizua, and Odigizua is a great producer for the Cowboys. So he would kind of be my top option because, and also he's proven he could play 70% of the snaps, even if he's not a good run defender either. Right. But we kind of talked about how that can be mitigated, especially by bringing Bullard back. And then as cheaper options, we both had both of these guys listed. So I feel pretty good about that. And we just revealed our lists kind of to each other now. Right. So we kind of did this blind, but Levi Onwuzurike from the Lions had, I believe, his best year, but has had like an injury riddled career. So that's kind of an injury flyer, more of a, we don't want to break the bank on that signing, but somebody might give him a Marcus Davenport contract, right? So like that could be a problem. Taylor Tart is somebody like people have always loved, and like the nerd football community has always loved, but he's had some weird off field stuff where it's like, I don't think it's like he's gotten into trouble off the field, but some really weird football related weirdness, right? Because he's on his third team since like last year. He started with the Titans, then went to the Texans and was with the Chargers and played pretty well in terms of rotational stuff. But I looked it up. He only played 300 snaps last year, right? So this is a guy who you're looking to bring in on a very limited basis, I think, if you bring him in, but could be a cheap option who adds a lot of juice as a pass rusher. So that's interior defensive line. And then next you had corner on your list, right? So we'll go to that, I think.
Yeah, so Reed there, I think, is my number one guy, but there's a few guys I like. I like Ward too. The guy I would prefer if Reed gets snapped up by somebody else is probably Carlton Davis. And you can probably tell here, I just prefer guys who I can trust in man coverage. And the Lions probably ran about as much man coverage as anybody. I thought Carlton Davis held himself up very well. He's also another guy who's, just turned 28. So not young, but you're not expecting a decline or a injury risk here necessarily. I think he's just a good player, and I think again, if the secondary is Murphy and Davis, I think you could base out a cover one. Like that's a really good secondary, and not that you would need to, but to be able to have that quiver in your pocket. And he's also a really good zone defender as well. So coming off an injury, but it's like a jaw. Broke his jaw, so hopefully that's not. I would say like hopefully he can play corner, but obviously he couldn't play corner for the Lions in the playoffs last year. So you need a functioning jaw. Don't want to re-injure it, I guess. But he's another guy I really like. There's a few guys like Asante Samuel Jr. I think is an intriguing guy if you want to go a little bit younger. It didn't seem like things worked out with him with Harbaugh last year. There's Mike Hughes is out there and like kind of seems like he's like pretty it totally depends on like
he was still with the Falcons last year, right? Didn't Addison dunk on him a couple times in that game?
He did. But like, you're asking for, who am I scraping from
Oh yeah, no.
from the barrel?
It's fair.
um so I mean, there's a lot of names. Like Christian Fulton's out there. There's some reclamation projects. And also it depends. Like, do you got like guys who are inside? Like Mike Hilton's a great slot corner. If you want a slot corner, and then like you could always if they don't bring back Gilmore, like there are outside guys as well. So I do actually think like the corner market. You're not necessarily going to get a outside of maybe DJ Reed, like a surefire Pro Bowler. Or I shouldn't say Reed is a surefire Pro Bowler, but there's not like a ton of top end talent necessarily. But I do think there's a lot of guys who could start on the Vikings roster. So there's a lot of names I like here.
Yeah. So my number one guy at corner, outside of Byron Murphy, is Charvarius Ward. I would take him over Reed. I do think he had a bit of a down year last year, but I think he had some like pretty significant family issues that might have impacted him. I don't remember what the exact report is, so I don't want to speak out of turn there. But he was with the Chiefs, obviously for a significant amount of time, went to San Francisco, became almost an even better player. He's got a lot of versatility in terms of experience in playing man coverage, experience in playing a wide variety of zone coverages. So I'd be hopeful that he can learn. And like, I think he was a really high quality player, especially in 2023. And then, so he would be my number one pick from a corner perspective from outside of the Vikings organization over DJ Reed. DJ Reed would be 2 for me probably. And then his cheaper options, I had Christian Fulton, who, maybe it's just me remembering the 2019 LSU Tigers and being like, yes, we should do that in the NFL. But, I think like, I didn't watch him obviously, but like, I think, it seems like he showed a little something with the Chargers last year as kind of a reclamation project, cheap option. And then I also had Nate Hobbs from the Raiders, who was like a versatile inside outside slot, slot corner, but can also play outside. Kind of got pushed out, I think, a little bit, or suffered injuries with the Raiders, so he didn't play as much, but was a pretty quality player when he was on the field. And he's a bigger player. Like he's still 6 foot and measures out pretty big. So I think he can hold up kind of on the outside, but it's cool to have a guy who's a little bit taller a little bit more size, who also was willing to play inside, right? Who also had the ability to play pretty well as a slot player. So that's kind of where I'm at. So why don't we move it on to the interior of the offensive line?
Here too, I know we talked a while about Trey Smith, but I actually think I'm used to there not being a lot of good options in the guard market, but I think the class here is really good. Obviously, you could go the expensive route with the Trey Smith. Hernandez is out there too.
Let's right the wrong. Mike Hughes. Let's bring back Mike Hughes and Will Hernandez. Let's do it.
Best of both worlds. We finally got all our draft dreams came true. Um, I think there's some reclamation like Tevin Jenkins could be interesting, but he's a little bit of a can you fix him and can he stay on the field? I think Mekhi Becton is really, really interesting. You question, if he's no longer with Jeff Stoutland, but I think Chris Cooper's a really good the coach as well. And he would also have some tackle capabilities if that, you were talking about, do we need a swing tackle? I think Becton kind of covers you and is capable of playing both spots and was a guard at a high level. If you want just like a 1-year stopgap, I think Zeitler is continuing to play at a very high level despite his age. I'm not sure if Brandon Scherf still has it, but he's also a name out there. And
From what I watched of Cam Robinson, not it for me.
Okay. But still, there are plenty of other names on the list, and there's Will Fries, and the Colts. There's a lot of good guys out there. Greg Van Roten, I remember wanting him back in the day. So they've got options here, which again, that's kind of why I'm a little bit more um, lukewarm on spending big on Trey Smith, just because I think that a lot of times people here are like, "Oh, let's go get a second tier guard," and getting Vikings fans get PTSD, saying like, "Oh, not again!" Like not another whoever, the Rhino or whatever, not one of these like backup tier guards that we're just going to cheap out on. But here, I think the second tier of guards are all quality players, solid starting players who would not be a liability for the Vikings offensive line, especially when they're being coached up by Chris Cooper again. So, yeah, a lot of good options here.
Yeah. So the two guys on my list were Will Fries, which obviously it's the same last name as mine, but I've heard everybody pronounce it Fries, like who does the announcements. So he's not like related to me that I know of. So obviously it's pronounced a little bit differently than my name, but I think he was a really good player for the Colts. He missed almost all of last year with injury, right? So that's the big question, is if the medicals turn out with him. But I think he could be a very quality option for the Vikings at right guard, and he was a starting right guard, right, for the Colts. Ben Bredesen from the Bucks is another option. The Bucks had a complete offensive line overhaul. Bredesen played really well last year. Kind of with the entirety of that unit. So that would be interesting to me for him to add as kind of the higher end options. And those are kind of the targets I would look for as opposed to a Trey Smith in free agency, just because I don't want to blow the doors off the top of the market. And then as a secondary guy, like I do think like a Zeitler or or I'm sorry, like the Zeitler is a pretty, intriguing option, especially as a veteran, to kind of get that in there. I'm not huge on the Will Hernandez. I'm not huge on Tevin Jenkins, just because I want a guy with a little bit more size in there, I think. And Mekhi Becton, it's hard for me to take the risk of like, okay, was this just Jeff Stoutland magic, or is he like actually a good player now? I had Aaron Banks, who was like from the 49ers, has a lot of experience in a similar system. I don't know if he's any good, to be honest with you. Like, I kind of always feel like the 49ers are looking to replace him. So maybe that's not the best answer, but that's kind of a bottom of the market guy, right? If you're not spending a lot of money on a guard, or you're not willing to invest a lot for a guard, you're going to get a bad football player, honestly, most likely. So it's kind of hard. Um, so next is the safety market. Do you have anything else on the safety market besides Holland?
I mean, like you said, this is a deep class. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there. Justin Reed's a free agent. Justin Simmons, I guess, is technically a free agent again. Um, there's a lot of good players out there, but again, I think the options are really either Bynum or Holland. And if it's not one of those two, I'd be very shocked, I guess. So I don't know. It's a good market. And that's good only insofar as I hope it drives down the price for Bynum or Holland. So I'm kind of I would go with one of those two, and would be shocked if it's not one of those guys.
Yeah, the only name I had down outside of that was Trayvon Merrick, who I kind of like coming out of the draft. Apparently has played pretty well for the Raiders. Don't really know much about him though, outside of that. So it's kind of like I am totally good with Bynum or Holland or bust. Like, and I feel like it should be pretty easy to just bring Cam Bynum back, as we kind of talked about. Um, so running back is kind of the final one, and then if you want to throw in anybody for your wide receiver 3 need as well.
Uh, it's just not like, is Dobbins better than Jones? I don't really think so. Chubb was obviously, but now is not. Najee Harris isn't good. Javonte Williams is kind of interesting, but again, I like Aaron Jones. So no, I'm maybe like there's the injury risk, but Elijah Mitchell might be interesting. Um, in case he's the kind of the odd man out with McCaffrey coming back. And I don't, who knows what happens with Mason and everybody else there in that 49ers. But he's a good running back, but just the injury question mark. So, again, I like Jones and I don't hate space. Why am I always blank? Akers. I don't hate Akers. Um, but it's a very weak running back market. It's a strong draft class for it. So I hope we solve it there. At wide receiver, I would love to see the homecoming return of Stephon Diggs. I'm just throwing it out there.
Bring him back.
Base out of 11 personnel all day. Do what the Texans did, but good this time. And have Jefferson, Diggs, and I mean, how fun would that be to watch? And be the 3 deep 3.0. So, it's a little bit crazy, but like, if you're going to spend $15 million, like getting Stephon Diggs and putting him on the field and basing out of 11, that would be one heck of an offense for your quarterback to slot into, and I think that'd be fireworks. So, he's still a really good player, still one of the best route runners in the league. So, that's my crazy idea that will probably never happen for lots of reasons, but a man can dream.
Yeah, obviously it's coming off the torn ACL, so that makes it kind of hard, right? But I
Heck, didn't
I
work
have
out, but
never wavered in my adoration of Stephon Diggs. Love him. Would love to see him back. Running back, I had the same list as you basically. I had J.K. Dobbins, Nick Chubb. Both of those are injury pending, right? Like J.K. Dobbins, I think would probably be my answer if we aren't able to bring Aaron Jones back for some reason, just because I think he was able to show enough last year where it looked like he is still a pretty quality player. Nick Chubb, I don't really know anything about, even if he did get back and play for the Browns last year. Like, I don't know if that was good or bad. There was no reason to watch the Cleveland Browns for any reason last year, frankly, unless your team played them, I guess. Um, and then the other option on the free agent market, who I had to like scroll down the list just because he was like an undrafted free agent, so he didn't get paid a lot, was Rico Dowdle, who I believe is an unrestricted free agent. He's not like an RFA or anything. Um, who I thought, I mean, obviously was the best running back on the Cowboys last year, but was like a pretty good player for what they got from him. So he would be interesting to me. I mean, I think the Dallas Cowboys would be stupid to not bring him back, but they're pretty stupid. So,
yeah. Oh
um,
well. Sorry, Zim.
yeah, man, I don't know that they brought in Matt Eberflus to replace Zim. Like, come on. Okay. So I watch more Cowboys than the average person, probably than the average Vikings fan. And like that defense was looking pretty good by the end of last year. It was not great to start. They didn't have anybody to defend the run. Um, and then they lost both of their primary pass rushers. It kind of felt like the 2020 to 2021 Vikings a little bit. Um,
Man.
but they were playing real hot towards the end of the season. So, I think that's it. It's been like, yeah. Um, so I think that's all we got. It's been like an hour and a half. This has been an awesome conversation to have, Nick. It's yeah. So you got anything else before we get out of here?
No, goodbye. I love you. That's
All
all I got,
right.
man.
Yeah, so I'll do the stuff real quick, right? I'm Matt Freeze. You can find me at Fries Football on BlueSky. I still technically have my Twitter account activated, but like I don't look there or post there pretty much ever anymore. I'll tweet this out, and that's like I will not respond to anything. Um, he's Nick Olson at Nick Olson NFL, still on Twitter. The podcast is at Kindred Skulls on both Twitter and BlueSky. You were available on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, also available on YouTube. And with that, Skull Vikings.
If you made it this far, God bless you.
Goal, baby.
The first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind. And we'll score. We'll score. Vikings along.